The full 2025 football schedule for the Miami Hurricanes is out, and this thing is bizarre.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. So we already knew before the full schedule release on Monday night, we already knew all of Miami's opponents. We already knew that Florida State would be the ACC opener. We knew that the Notre Dame game would be on a Sunday night, August 31st, to open up the season at 7:30 p.m. But we can now fill in all the rest of the blanks because the entire schedule has been released. Let's take a look at it. I'll take a look at what's bizarre about it, all right? So as we knew, Notre Dame opens up the season 7:30 p.m. on August 31st. Then Miami has a couple of easier games to follow that up. They're going to host Bethune-Cookman on September 6th. They're going to host USF on September 13th. And then things get very difficult again. Miami's got to welcome in DJ Lagway and the Florida Gators, return end of that home and home on September 20th. Then Miami opens up the ACC schedule against the Florida State Seminoles, which is going to be after a bye week, by the way. Miami has a bye week before Florida State in Tallahassee. That's the first ACC game. Then Miami has another bye week after Florida State, taking on Louisville after that. Okay, so that's the first thing that's wild, to have two bye weeks within 3 weeks. The ACC schedule makers, are they drunk? Like, what are they thinking? I thought it was perfect last year. Miami had an early-ish season bye week and then a late season bye week in November. I thought that was spread out perfectly a year ago. This time around, they're just like, hey, you get a bye, then you get a bye again 2 weeks later. So Miami has two byes within 3 weeks. Now, here's the silver lining to that, folks. I do like the fact that, and hopefully Miami is constructive coming off of those bye weeks, because historically that's not always the case. Miami has a bye week before Florida State, so not saying I expect Florida State to be great this year, but they'll be better than they were at 2-10 last year. You can bank on that. So the Hurricanes get an extra week to prepare for a rivalry game against Florida State, and then they also get an extra week to prepare for Louisville, which is one of the tougher games on the schedule. Now, maybe that one's canceled out because Louisville also has a bye week heading into their matchup with Miami. But two byes in 3 weeks, weird. Miami will take on Stanford. They'll host Stanford at Hard Rock Stadium October 25th. They will play at SMU November 1st. Here's another thing that's bizarre. November 1st is the first time the Hurricanes will leave the state of Florida. Every game prior to that is either a home game or against another team on the road within the state. So you don't leave the state until November 1st at SMU. That's going to be Miami East versus Miami West, with former Hurricanes offensive coordinator Rhett Lashley coaching that team and all the former Miami Hurricanes who play there. So that's going to be big. And SMU also could be one of the tougher games on the schedule. I think they'll take a little bit of a step back this year, but they were just in the college football playoff and they finished ahead of Miami in the ACC. Then Miami will take on Syracuse at home November 8th. Syracuse, of course, spoiled Miami's season last year. No Kyle McCord, no Aronde Gadsden II, no LaQuint Allen. So Syracuse may take a step back. Miami better win that game after the way they lost to Syracuse last year. Then Miami has NC State at home. South Florida kid CJ Bailey, their quarterback out of Chaminade. It's going to be homecoming for him. And then Miami ends the season with two road games at Virginia Tech and at Pittsburgh. And that's another bizarre part about this schedule. So Hurricanes, 12 games on the schedule, only 4 road games all season. 4 road games, 8 home games, and yet somehow with only 4 road games on the schedule, 2 of those are in back-to-back weeks to end the year. So Miami's got to have their big boy pants on at the end of the season. You know, Virginia Tech, they almost beat Miami last year. Kyron Drones is back. They've got a new defensive coordinator. I don't know what to make of Pittsburgh. Eli Holstein is back for them, but, Pitt, they won their first 7 games. They lost their final 6 games to end the year last year. But your 2 final games are road games, and that means the senior day is going to be awkwardly early. Final home game of the year, you honor your outgoing seniors. Usually that game is either the last or second to last game of the season. It's going to be mid-November this year when Miami hosts NC State. That is going to be senior day. So some weird stuff about this schedule. 2 road games to end the year. Don't leave the state of Florida till November. The bye weeks are freakishly close together. I don't think I like that at all. Hopefully Miami actually plays well coming out of the bye weeks. Let's talk toughest games on the schedule, folks. I believe your 2 toughest games are both non-conference. So, theoretically, not that I want this to happen, if you lose your 2 toughest games and win all the rest, you would still be in position to play for the ACC championship game and potentially make the college football playoff. I would say the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, that defense of theirs, coming off a national runner-up spot in the college football playoff championship game. I know there's some changes on Notre Dame, including our old friend Al Golden is no longer their defensive coordinator. He went to the Cincinnati Bengals, but I would still consider Notre Dame to be the toughest game on the schedule. I could make the case for Florida being the second toughest game on the schedule. They're going to have revenge on their minds after we went into their house last year and beat the brakes off of the Gators 41-17. They're going to look for a little payback. Then I would say third toughest game on the schedule. I think it's between Louisville and SMU. Now, a lot of people would say SMU, it's on the road, and they had that, ACC championship appearance last year. I think SMU, in my humble opinion, probably taking a slight step back. And I think Louisville, on the other hand, might even be better than they were this past season. Now they have Miller Moss at quarterback, who could end up being better than Tyler Shuck was there. It's definitely between those 2. Maybe you give the edge to SMU because that one's on the road, but Louisville or SMU, those are in no particular order, the 3rd and 4th toughest games on the schedule. NC State, they had a really poor year last year, but I expect them to bounce back at least a little bit. And Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh on the road are going to be tricky. So we knew this already with Notre Dame and Florida in the non-conference schedule. Florida State's going to be better than they were last year. I don't know how good, though. Maybe a 6 or 7 win type of team. We already knew the schedule is going to be tougher this coming season than it was last year. So you got to hope Miami has fortified their defense, and you've got to hope Carson Beck hits the ground running as a Miami Hurricane. So there you have the Miami Hurricane schedule. Home against Notre Dame, home against Bethune-Cookman, home versus USF, home versus Florida, at Florida State, versus Louisville at home, versus Stanford, at SMU, versus Syracuse, versus NC State, at Virginia Tech, at Pittsburgh. We'll continue to break it down through the week. By the way, we're going to have our full episode of Locked On Canes coming up shortly. Sports Hall of Famer and College Football Hall of Famer Darren Smith is going to join the Truth Teller and me. So you definitely want to tune in for that. But I wanted to give you guys a brief breakdown on the schedule first. So we'll talk to you in a little bit with College Football Hall of Famer Darren Smith, the Truth Teller, and me right here on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.